Hey guys, it is Wednesday, which means it's time for a video from me. On Friday, you are going to be seeing a tag that Gretchen and I filmed, I want to say back in February, that we kept pushing off because we were doing other more relevant things to the time period. But it is us talking about our reading taste when it comes to fantasy, and I'm trying to do today something that links with that by talking about a couple of the books on my TBR for fantasy, specifically that Booktube made me buy. This is also sort of in conversation with this whole TikTok has been selling books, and does TikTok sell books and Booktube doesn't? I don't know if they're at the same volume, because as a bookseller I can definitely say that those like really major books that TikTok has been pushing are like selling out of our stores right now. Whereas with Booktube, you definitely see books rise in popularity and then move out. I just don't know if it's on the same level, or it's hard to quantify that when they're already quite popular titles as well in the world at large. One of the things that I wanted to take into account while I was doing this video was I wanted to try and find a couple of new booktubers to follow. I do follow a handful of SFF-focused folks, but not very many, and I've been realizing recently that I have not been going out and searching for new booktubers. In general, I've been watching the same, I don't know, dozens of booktubers I've been watching for years now, and very rarely do I pick up a new person. And that feels weird to me, because it used to be that I would find new people all the time, and maybe that was just because I was new to Booktube, so I was finding new people, it was being recommended to me. I don't know if something has changed in the recommended algorithm as well, because most of my recommended videos are people I already watch. Even if I generally watch out of my subscription box, which isn't common for YouTube, I understand, but even in my recommended box, it's primarily people I subscribe to, or quite large people in general. And I haven't been seeing a lot of small booktubers, and I love small booktubers because we are small booktubers. So yes, I wanted to find a couple of people who are small booktubers, probably larger than us because we're honestly the bottom of the barrel here, and recommend their videos talking about these books as well. The first book I bought, because everybody was talking about it on Booktube, Jade City by Fonda Lee. This was much more popular. It like crossed over into the YA group of people, despite being very clearly an adult fantasy. From what I understand, this is very dark fantasy as well. There's drug abuse, or the equivalent of drug abuse, magic drug abuse in this world. It's a sort of dystopian world where a substance called jade is used to give you powers, and certain people can use jade and other people can't, but it also has an addicting property to it, or a drug underground market to it. So I've heard really good things about this. It's really chunky though, which always I love, and I pick up chunky books and then they sit here because I feel intimidated that I would have to spend 2 weeks reading a book instead of reading like 3 tiny books in 1 week. Stupid, I know. I watched Merphy's review of this one, and I will link that up above, where she talked about it, and I talk about this in the tag that you're going to see on Friday as well. She's not a small booktuber, but she's new-ish to me. I just found her this year, which feels embarrassing because of how large she is in the fantasy booktube area. But yeah, there was a couple of pretty big fantasy booktubers that I wasn't subscribed to that I have added onto the list. She, I think, is the largest booktuber I'm going to talk about today, but I really enjoy her videos. She's very thorough about what she talks about in each video. When she does a review, I feel like I know what I'm getting into. She breaks down all of the different areas of a book and really gets into it, and then also does some spoiler discussion of specific things that bothered her. It isn't just the ephemeral, I liked the plot, the pacing was bad, the characters didn't have whatever. There's more to it, and then she gets into the details, which I always appreciate. As someone who very rarely ever feels like something can be spoiled for me, I don't mind going into spoiler sections even when I haven't read a book. But something to keep in mind. The first book that I picked up because of Booktube, Jade City by Fonda Lee. In a similar vein, I have The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Dark, grim fantasy. This one, again, was making the rounds not so much on YA Booktube, but on Fantasy Booktube itself, and also into a little bit of general Booktube. I saw some people who don't normally read fantasy that picked this one up, which means that it's probably a really good book. For this one, I watched Sophie at the Book Basement's review of it, and she did a great job talking about it. I've been trying to pick up more books by Asian authors, this obviously R.F. Kuang being one of them. But I've also been finding that I prefer fantasy that is not set in medieval Europe. Asian-based fantasy being the one that intrigues me the most as someone who has done some research on things like Korean culture and Chinese culture. Having something like this is more interesting to me, and it's especially important to me to read books by authors who have ties to those cultures, whether or not they are in China or whether their family is Chinese. If they have ties to those cultures, or whatever Asian country it's based off of, this one's Chinese, but whatever Asian country it's based off of, I think it's important to support those folks. So I picked up this one. I'm glad that it got a lot of buzz. The trilogy, I think the third book in that trilogy came out this past year, and I have all three. I have an arc of the third one actually that I picked up from work. So hopefully I can read this one. It's on my docket for this year. I will get there. I've actually been watching Sophie longer than any of the other people that I'm talking about in this, but I feel like her videos are very rarely recommended to me in my recommended section, or even showing it up in my subscription boxes. I'm not sure why that is. So when I was looking for reviews of this and I saw her pop up, I was like, oh, awesome. I already subscribed to her. Why didn't I see this video when she posted it? Weird. So yeah, she's also slightly larger, definitely larger than us, but slightly larger than some of the other folks that I'm going to talk about today. She, I think, reads primarily YA, or used to read primarily YA. She may be dabbling in adult stuff now, but again, I haven't been seeing her videos, so I don't know what that's about. I highly recommend her as well. She's very thoughtful, and I just love her personality. She's very cute. So, Sophie at the Book Basement. The next book is another one that made the rounds, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is the first time I've ever heard of T.J. Klune, although T.J. Klune is a bit of an established author from my understanding. There were several books of his that have come out. There's another one of his that is also on my TBR for this year, so this one as well as another one that I don't think is fantasy. I think that one's more realistic fiction. I thought that this one was young adult, but for our bookstore they shelved it in the adult fantasy. From my understanding, it's about a group of kids at an orphanage, magic kids at an orphanage type thing, or a school to teach them how to use their powers. But the thing that made me want to read it was that I've heard people describe this as a hug in a book. And when so many of those fantasy books that I was showing you are grim, dark fantasies, reading something that's more lighthearted, I think, would be a really good break from that. Even a lot of the regular fiction that I've been hearing about and picking up are quite dark and emotional, which I understand in reaction to everything that's going on in the world today. Why wouldn't we have some grim, dark themes and stuff going on? But having something positive, or at least hopeful, might be nice to break up the monotony. The booktubers whose review I watched for this one is Michaniya over at Bookmarked for Later. She's read multiple of T.J. Klune's books, so that was really helpful to see her discuss this book in conjunction with his other books, because most of the other reviews that I had seen of this were like this was their first time reading this author. So hearing that discussion was really awesome. It was also a positive review, which always makes me want to read it. I really liked her personality. It was super cute, and just finding another person to subscribe to is always great. She's very thoughtful, and comparing an author's works with themselves is something that I always enjoy. Hearing how people grow and change over time, both positively and negatively. Like, this book is a more recent book, but maybe it's not as good as something that they've written previously. Whatever it is, I always appreciate that sort of thing. Talking about books on their own is one thing, but talking about them like in conjunction with each other is also just an interesting conversation. So yeah, I recommend going to watch her video if you haven't heard about this one. I don't know how you wouldn't have heard about this one. It was all over the place everywhere. If you saw some of my videos last year, you will know that I have been trying to read more Indigenous literature. So I picked up Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. It's my understanding that it uses or takes influence from several different pre-colonial American cultures, including the Aztecs. which were a culture that I found super interesting. I also believe that it takes the idea of, like, what if colonialism didn't happen sort of thing, where, like, these societies are more futuristic, but then again, it's fantasy. Rebecca Roanhorse is an established author. Everybody loves her. She writes for children, for teens, and this one is an adult fiction. Obviously, I bought it in hardback, so it's interesting. From what I understand, one of the characters in here is also blind and scarred. So there might be some interesting things surrounding disability in here as well. The review that I watched for this was Alicia Guzman's video. I had not heard from her before. I found her talking about this and subscribed to her instantly. She was very thoughtful when she was talking about it and discussed it from the perspective of someone who reads what I think is similarly to me, which is quite widely when it comes to genre. Listening to people who read primarily fantasy is one thing, but when you see people who break in and out of different genres, they tend to have a different way of reviewing books, and I always love seeing people who read very widely, because it means that they are going to have a different perspective and perhaps feel differently about tropes, feel differently about the writing style, things like that. I feel like I'm being repetitive, but their personality is great. I don't know what more I can add to that aspect of it. I recommend watching her video and anything else that she's put out. This last book, for any UK/European people watching this, is going to be like, wow, you've really slept on that one. Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. This is an old book. This is not a new book, but last year I believe I think it's a TV adaptation came out, and a bunch of people were talking about it again. I don't think this was as popular in the States when it was coming out as it was overseas, which might be why I missed it back in the early 2000s. This is either young adult or adult fantasy. I believe this copy was shelved in adult fantasy, but again, I've heard people discuss it as a young adult title. It basically flips racism on its head in Europe. It makes you, while you're reading it, think that you understand the racial identities of the characters when in fact they are the opposite, which I think is super interesting and just goes to talk about everybody's own internal biases about what certain characteristics we identify and give to certain folks based on nothing to do with their physical appearance, but still is somehow attributed to a specific race. This obviously is also a series, so it's something where if I do love it, I can binge the whole series. And I feel bad for having not read it before. Apparently it's very monumental and influential for a lot of folks, and I don't think that it got as much love here. I just honestly think that it wasn't touched upon here. I watched Helen at Helen Explains talk about this, and specifically, like, sort of explain it. Just what she does, explain what it's doing. It was an older video, I think, again, talking about it before the TV show was going to come out, and it was just interesting to hear a critical analysis of, like, what this book is trying to do. While some people may feel like that spoils the book because I'm not going to read it blindly and have the same experience that other people might have, I think it might enhance my own reading of it in order to analyze how it's doing what it's doing while I'm reading it. Take that with a grain of salt. If you don't want to be spoiled for the plot, I may have spoiled it for you by discussing it already, but you'll definitely get spoiled if you go watch her video. So if you haven't read this, maybe don't go see that, but I would still go recommend checking out her videos as well. So yeah, those are a couple of the fantasy books I've picked up recently, primarily because Booktube made me buy them. I've heard people talk about them multiple times. Those are a couple of folks that I think did a good job about talking about these books. Then I would recommend that you go and check out their stuff. And all in all, I hope that you guys are having a good day. I hope you enjoy the tag that's going to be out on Friday with Gretchen and I talking about our fantasy tastes, and we'll talk to you again soon.